Hello everyone, this is Reverend Dr. Roger Paul. I'm here with my wife, Reverend Diane Paul, in our group tonight. And tonight we're going to continue with our study of paper 64. And we're on section 6 on page 722.6. We actually read these first two paragraphs, but we're going to read them again for consistency tonight. So thank you for joining us. Let's say a little prayer and we'll get started. Father, thank you for bringing us together tonight that we might study together and learn more about this wonderful revelation. Pray that you'll open our hearts and our minds that we might retain some of this information and share it with others. We would like to do your will in our lives, and we know this is part of your will. We thank you. We give you the praise in your son's name, Jesus of Nazareth, Michael of Nebadon. Amen. Okay, I think I'll start out tonight. The six Sangate races of Urantia. On an average evolutionary planet, the six evolutionary races of color appear one by one. The red man is the first to evolve, and for ages he roams the world before the succeeding colored races make their appearance. The simultaneous emergence of all six races on Urantia and in one family is most unusual, and it may be because we're an experimental planet, right?
Roger?
Yeah.
I didn't catch it last time, but it's saying here that usually the red man appears, and for ages.
That's right. Probably for thousands of years he's here first, and then the other races just start popping up one at a time.
Because I know when this book talks about an age, that's a long time.
It's a long time, that's right. But that's not the way it happened on our planet for some reason. All six of them came from the same family.
And it makes you wonder if the red man is pretty well dominant.
Yeah, he's one of the three dominant colors, for sure. This is a good word. Here we go. This is a map of the world of the six Sangate races, and when they talk about these different things and how they migrate, you can refer to this map and look back on it. And this we talked about a little bit last time. This is from Don Estes' chart. And this is you can see the yellow race, red race, blue race, that's the dominant races. And then there's the orange, green, and indigo. These are the secondary races, colored races. Right. Rodney, would you take the next one, please?
The appearance of the earlier Andronites on Urantia was also something new and Satanian. On no other world in the local system has such a race of world creatures evolved in advance of the evolutionary races of color.
So just the order in which everything happened was completely different on this
So,
planet.
what's it saying here? That usually the colors come out first.
Yeah, probably. The colors come out first, like the red man first, and then they segregate into different things. So it's kind of interesting, isn't it? All right, and now this is where we left off last time. So let's continue on with this. Millie, would you take the next one, please, dear?
Number one, the red man. These peoples were remarkably specimens of the human race. Remarkable specimens of the human race, in many ways superior to Andon and Fanta. They were a most intelligent group and were the first of the Sangate children to develop a tribal civilization and government. They were always monogamous. Even their mixed descendants seldom practiced plural mating.
Okay, so it was the red man of the Sangate children that really started being monogamous. Up to that point, all the races were intermixing. I mean, all the beings that were on the planet were intermixing and that sort of thing. Was that 10 coming on? No? Okay.
In later times, they had serious and prolonged trouble with their yellow brethren in Asia. They were aided by their early invention of the bow and arrow, but they had unfortunately inherited much of the tendency of their ancestors to fight among themselves. And this so weakened them that the yellow tribes were able to drive them off the Asiatic continent.
Okay, and remember that the yellow man ended up being more peace-loving later on than any of the races. And it's interesting that because of the reproduction of the red man in North America and down through Central America and that sort of thing, if they had not fought among one another, they would have ended up still being the dominant race. In other words, they wiped out whole generations of their own progeny with this continuous warring among the different Indian tribes. And what's interesting is if they had not done that, they would have pretty much dominated the world. But so when the white man came to North America, it would have been the white man that then had gotten wiped out instead of the red man. So it's just kind of interesting the way things happen. I think I'm up next. About 85,000 years ago, the comparatively pure remnants of the red race went en masse across to North America. And shortly thereafter, the Bering Strait Isthmus sank, thus isolating them. No red man ever returned to Asia, but throughout Siberia, China, Central Asia, India, and Europe, they left behind much of their stock blended with the other colored races. So they went across Asia, they mixed with the yellow man and the other colors, and eventually went across the Bering Strait in North America, and then the strait sank, and that was it. They didn't go back again. All right? All right. All right. Rodney, did you take the next one?
We lost Rodney.
Hold on, he's back on.
He's online. You want to call him?
See if you can drag him over. Do I need to come up? Huh? Okay. Y'all hang on for a second. We'll go to work.
I got it.
You got him?
I think it is. Looks like it is.
List. Rodney, you back with us?
Yeah, I got unplugged, sorry.
Sorry.
My desk is so cluttered. I didn't realize I unplugged myself.
Okay, Rodney, we're on
Okay, I see that, yes.
6466. You want to take it from there?
My turn?
Yeah.
When the red man crossed over into America, he brought along much of the teachings and traditions of his early origin. His immediate ancestors had been in touch with the later activities of the world headquarters of the planetary prince. But in a short time after reaching the Americas, the red man began to lose sight of these teachings, and there occurred a great decline in intellectual and spiritual culture. Very soon, these people again fell to fighting so fiercely among themselves that it appeared that these tribal wars would result in the speedy extinction of this remnant of the comparatively pure red race.
They almost wiped themselves out, didn't they? But it's interesting that their ancestors had been in touch with the Dalmatian, the area of the planetary prince, or the world headquarters of the planetary prince. And so they got some of the teachings that the prince's staff was giving them, but they lost sight of those spiritual teachings very soon once they left the area, right? So that's what happens, just because one generation learns something, if they don't pass it down to the next generation and the next generation, it eventually becomes so watered down that they lose sight of the teachings altogether, right? So that's why it's important we teach our children. Okay. Millie, I think you're up.
Yes. Because of this great retrogression, the red man seemed doomed when about 65,000 years ago, Alaman Alantan appeared as their leader and spiritual deliverer. He brought temporary peace among the American red men and revived their worship of the Great Spirit. Atamana Lantan lived to be 96 years of age and maintained his headquarters among the great redwood trees of California. Many of his later descendants have come down to a modern times among the Blackfoot Indians.
And we talked about this. I believe Atamana Lantan is one of the 24 counselors, right? Because he had the experience of doing it, probably.
Roger, I can barely hear you.
Oh, sorry. I'll speak up a little bit.
You said something about, we talked about this.
Yeah, Atamana Lantan is, I believe, is one of the 24 counselors on Jerusalem.
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. Okay. Dear, I think you're next.
I wondered about the red man when he was the first one and for ages and ages only existed the red man. I wondered, did they war against each other then, or was it standard, or is it just because they all came together at one time?
It's possible they probably did, but they probably didn't do it so extensively that they would wipe themselves out because there were so many of them. But it was probably the limited number, and I think they started out a limited number of tribes. But if you know from the map we had from all the different tribes of the Indians, there's hundreds of them. So whenever you get groups of people segregating themselves from other groups and then they come back together, people have a tendency to aggravate each other, and so that's how these wars come up. It's not being kind to your neighbor. My neighbor, my neighbor's dog came in my yard, and that sort of thing. Okay. Want to read the next one?
As time passed, the teachings of Atamana Lantan became hazy traditions. In turn, some wars were resumed, and never after the days of this great teacher did another leader succeed in bringing universal peace among them. Increasingly, the more intelligent strains perished in these tribal struggles. Otherwise, a great civilization would have been built upon the North American continent by these able and intelligent red men.
That would have been our history if they hadn't killed each other. Interesting. After crossing over to America from China, the northern red man never again came in contact with other world influences, except the Eskimos, until he later discovered by the white man. That was, us, right? It was most unfortunate that the red man almost completely missed his opportunity of being upstepped by the mixture of the later Adamic stock. As it was, the red man could not rule the white man, and he would not willingly serve him. And such a circumstance, if the two races do not blend, one or the other is doomed. That's what happened to the red man.
But they had got blended.
They did, but their culture really was. If you think about it, Rodney, the red culture was doomed. When the white man came to this country, he literally continued to wipe out the remnants of the red man, and the ones that did survive, those ended up, most of them, blending with the white man. So that's why you talk to anybody, almost everybody you see says, I'm 1/8 Indian or 1/4 Indian or this and that and the other, because somewhere in the history of that two or 300 years, someone in their family mixed with the red stock, and so we ended up being, it really watered down the red man. But really the red man, the pure red man, is literally gone with the exception of the Eskimos. Right?
Yeah, because of disease mainly, right?
Yeah, we brought disease to them and all the bad things of white culture, including drinking, that sort of thing.
And, so they mostly missed the Adamic blood.
Not really all of it, I mean, because if you think the white race got a large portion of the Adamic blood, and when the white men mixed with the red men, that's how they ended up getting a small portion of the Adamic blood, right?
It would be the same with the Eskimo.
It's the same with the Eskimo, that's right. All right.
They missed out on it too.
Yeah. You want to take the next one, Rodney? The orange men?
All right. I'm just getting a pillow to sit on here. Okay, number 2, the Orange Man. The outstanding characteristics of this race was their peculiar urge to build. Sounds like me. To build anything and everything, even to the piling up of vast mounds of stone, just to see which tribe could build the largest mound. Though they were not a progressive people, they profited much from the schools of the prince and sent delegates there for instruction.
So they wanted to learn. They were natural learners, weren't they? Okay.
The building instinct.
Yeah. Millie, would you take the next one, please?
The Orange race was the first to follow the coastline southward toward Africa as the Mediterranean Sea withdrew to the west. But they never secured a favorable footing in Africa and were wiped out of existence by the later arriving green race.
Isn't that interesting? The green race pretty much wiped them out.
Before the end came, this people lost much cultural and spiritual ground, but there was a great revival of higher living as a result of the wise leadership of Porshashunta, the mastermind of this unfortunate race, who ministered to them when their headquarters was at Armageddon, some 300,000 years ago.
Okay, 300,000 years ago. You catch that? All the legends of Armageddon is about this fact, okay? That the orange race, which was, the leader was Prashanta, was wiped out by the green race. And that's where the battles of Armageddon came from, okay? And that history of that was passed down generation to generation, and the stories of Armageddon are the result of this wiping out of the orange race 300,000 years ago. Not 4,000 years ago, okay? And it's not anything to do with the future coming of Christ and the big battle that's going to take place between believers and non-believers. That's not what this is about. Armageddon was the location of the wiping out of the orange race. So
I wonder, was that in Africa?
that was, no, I think it was the Middle East, actually, Rodney. Close to
Well, they had moved along Africa, along the Mediterranean Sea.
That's right. But it was started from the Mediterranean and went all the way down the coast into Africa, and now what's considered Egypt. Okay.
So they were basically wiped out in Africa.
Yeah, pretty much. Just completely destroyed mass.
What was the green man doing in Africa?
Well, they were migrating down, and it was the resources, Millie. You know, they were going where they could find resources, and that's what this is all about. Let's keep going, and it talks us about the Nile Valley in Egypt and stuff. So, I think you're right.
The last great struggle between the orange and the green men occurred in the region of the lower Nile Valley in Egypt. This long drawn-out battle was waged for almost 100 years, and at its close, very few of the orange race were left alive. The shattered remnants of these people were absorbed by the green and by the later arriving indigo man. But as a race, the orange man ceased to exist about 100,000 years ago.
Yeah. Now, did y'all catch this? It took the period of almost 200,000 years to completely wipe out the orange race.
Oh, yeah.
And that's why the Battle of Armageddon and that sort of thing was such an interesting legend, because one of these battles went on for 100 years. 100 years of multiple generations all fighting the same war. You know, that's a long time to be in a war.
But how long did Ireland fight the South Ireland? I mean,
It happens today.
Yeah.
And look how long that the people of the Middle East have been battling each other. You know, thousands of years. So, you know, some of these things just don't seem to go away. All right, and the other interesting thing about that is, what race will that wipe out? You know, that's an interesting question. All right, who just read?
Yeah, I couldn't
You do?
hear you on that one either.
Oh, sorry, I'll try to speak up.
In a comment, I couldn't catch it. Could you, Millie?
No, I can't hear a lot of what he says. It's muffled. Something wrong with his mic.
Muffled.
Really? I hope the people at home can hear me.
I noticed it last week too.
Oh, okay.
It's not as clear as you are sometimes.
Okay, well, I'll try to speak up. See, my microphone is in the camera. It's across the room, so. All right. 3, the yellow man. The primitive yellow tribes were the first to abandon the chase, establish settled communities, and develop a home life based on agriculture. Intelligently, they were somewhat inferior to the red man, but socially and collectively they proved themselves superior to all of the Samitic peoples in the matter of fostering racial civilization. Because they developed a fraternal spirit, the various tribes learning to live together in relatively peace, they were able to drive the red race before them as they gradually expanded into Asia. So, as they moved across Asia, the yellow race, which is the Chinese, Japanese, that sort of thing, literally moved the red man off the continent into the Bering Strait, into North America, and then the yellow man stayed in the Asian continent, right? What, Rodney, take your next.
They traveled far from the curtain of the spiritual headquarters of the world and drifted into great darkness following the Calicastian apostasy.
That's right.
But there occurred one brilliant age among this people when Singleton, about 100,000 years ago, assumed the leadership of these tribes and proclaimed the worship of the one truth.
Notice how this theme keeps coming up about the one God or the one truth or the one great spirit. It keeps reverberating, coming back and back and back. And what do you think that is? Could be the fostering of the thought adjusters, right? Of that concept in the human mind. All right. Millie, I think you're up again.
Okay. The survival of comparatively large numbers of the yellow race is due to their intertribal peacefulness. From the days of Singleton,
Singlangton, yeah.
Singleton,
Right.
to the times of modern China, the yellow race has been numbered among the more peaceful of the nations of Eurasia. This race received a small but potent legacy of the later imported Adamic stock.
Because of that Adamic influence, they become more peaceful people, right?
Used to be.
Yeah.
4, the green man. The green race was one of the less able groups of primitive men, and they were greatly weakened by extensive migrations into different directions. Before their dispersion, these tribes experienced a great revival of culture under the leadership of Fadad, some 350,000 years ago.
Okay, Fendad was another great spiritual leader, right, of the green man. You know, every race comes up with these leaders that pop up, right? The green race split into 3 major divisions. The northern tribes were subdued, enslaved, and absorbed by the yellow and the blue races. The eastern group were amalgamated with the Indian peoples of those days, and remnants still persist among them. The southern nation entered Africa, where they destroyed their almost equally inferior orange cousins. Remember the big war between the green and the orange, okay? the ones that remained basically mixed in and became the people of India, right? I'm sure some of them were in like the Mediterranean, that sort of thing, Italians. All right.
In many ways, both groups were evenly matched in this struggle, since each carried strains of the giant order,
Yes.
many of their leaders being 8 and 9 feet in height. Holy cow. These giant strains of the green man were mostly confined to the southern or Egyptian nation.
Okay, you know this whole thing about the green giant? The
The
legend of
Chalk
the
Green
green
Giant.
giant? This is where it comes from,
That's interesting, huh?
you know? The big green giant. And who do you think some of the strain of this green giantism and actually started?
What was that now?
Who do you think started this strain of giantism in human beings?
I thought Adam and Eve did.
No. This is
I
way.
thought it was Adam and Eve. They were huge.
No, this is way before them.
Well, then it must have been the planetary planets.
It was the Caligastan, the rebellious Caligastan 100, right? They mixed with the sons and daughters of men, right? They were already huge beings. So this giant strain originated from them and probably was passed down generation to generation until it really became prominent by the green race. Now, another interesting thing about this is they went down into Egypt, right? And you remember if you've ever studied anything about Egyptian history, on the pyramids they have examples of giants, you know? And that's where these giants came from. They didn't come down from outer space. They weren't aliens like everybody in the ancient alien group thinks, that they would like to believe that. They were actually the result of the Caligastan 100 and their descendants year after year after year after that. And so when they ended up in Egypt, when these guys popped up and they were so huge and had this green tent and stuff, of course, what did they do? They made them semi-gods, right? Because they were so huge. They thought they were something special. So that's where this comes from. So if you know this kind of history and people try to tell you that some little green men came back and created these giants, you know that's not true, right? So there's truth to be had. There's bits of truth in everything. You know, you just have to discern where it comes from. Okay.
We had right away the Caligastan 100. They were mixed with people from outer space. You can think of it that way.
Well, if you want to think of Adam and Eve from outer space, in
That's what I
reality
mean.
they were from another planet, weren't they?
Yeah.
So in essence, they were from outer space, right? So is that 10?
Yes.
Okay. Just add it
Tim's
to
on.
group.
Tim showed up on
Add it to group. The little thing there says add to group.
There he is.
Hey, Roger.
Hey, how you doing?
Hey, Tim.
I apologize, I'm running late tonight.
It's all right.
Happens for
We're on paper 64-6, paragraph 20.
Okay, I can't even see you right now. For some odd reason.
It's probably me.
Oh, there you are. Okay, great.
Okay.
Okay, there.
was talking about the green man.
We were just talking about the green men, how some of these giant green men ended up on the pyramids, Tim, because of the strains of the history of the Caligastan 100, which were 8 foot tall. They were 8 foot tall. So it was probably their descendants is where the strain started out, and they ended up coming in the green races. So, okay.
And the leaders being 8 and 9 feet tall.
Yeah, they are 8 and 9 feet tall. Yeah, but I was just giving you an example. Okay, let's.
Okay, I got it.
let's go on. Who's up next? Millie, I think. Millie, I think you're next. Yeah.
Who just read?
Oh, she did?
Oh, it's me too.
Oh, let's be Diane then.
The
No, I
rest-
said who read?
You read.
Actually, let's put Tim in there next. And then,
Rodney, you read about 8, 9 foot tall people.
that's
Oh,
right.
okay.
Tim, could you take it up from
Or
620?
Egyptian.
That's right.
Yes, Roger. The remnants of the victorious green men were subsequently absorbed by the indigo race, the last of the colored people to develop and immigrate from the original Sandgate center of race dispersion.
Okay, so the green was eventually absorbed by the indigo race, or the black man, right? Mixing with the black man. And if you think about Egyptian history, that makes perfect sense because the green went down into Egypt. They ran into the migrating indigo race, which was heading down to Africa. So in that migration, they mixed with the green and absorbed the green and ended up taking them with them into Africa, right? Okay, makes perfect sense. You know how it all works out. This is an interesting group here, the next one.
But
Diane?
we've basically eliminated the orange and green.
That's right, orange and green are all gone now, right?
They've been absorbed in other races.
That's right.
I think it's Millie's turn.
Huh?
It's Millie's turn.
Oh, is it Millie? Oh. Did Millie?
I get to read.
Oh, I thought she just read right before 10.
Tim just read.
Okay, go ahead.
And before that was Rodney.
Okay.
Before that was Roger. Before that was Diane.
Remember sticking Tim in between Millie and Rodney. Okay. Go ahead.
Number
Millie.
5, the Blue Man. The Blue Men were a great people. They early invented the spear and subsequently worked out the rudiments of many of the arts of modern civilization. The Blue Man had the brain power of the Red Man, associated with the soul and sentiment of the Yellow Man. The Adamic descendants preferred them to all of the later persisting colored races.
Okay, so they were preferred because of their intelligence, right? And their soul and sentiment of the mixture with the yellow man, okay, because of their family values and that sort of thing.
At that time, the Yellow Men were very peaceful, got along
Very peaceful.
together.
That's right. All right.
The Blue Men were responsive to the persuasions of the teachers of Prince Caligasti's staff and were thrown into great confusion by the subsequent perverted teachings of those tutorious leaders. Like other primitive races, they never fully recovered from the turmoil produced by the Caligastia betrayal, nor did they ever completely overcome their tendency to fight among themselves.
Okay, so think about this. All these colored races were started out around the time of Caligasta's staff was here. 250,000 years they taught people, right? All the different races. So they were teaching them how to live together and be peaceful and that sort of thing, okay? Teaching them about spiritual values, things that's good for them. Well, then all of a sudden Caligasta goes into rebellion and all bets were off, right? So that threw all these races into total confusion. So what starts happening is they start warring with each other because of the Caligasta 100 that rebelled, the 60 that rebelled. They basically was pushing this stuff on, saying you can do anything you want, you can become powerful, you can do what, anything goes. And so instead of being peace-loving and concerned about their neighbors and that sort of thing, they just started stealing, killing, taking their wives, things like that. So that threw all races into confusion, but especially the blue men, because they've been taught these peaceful ways and these spiritual values, and all of a sudden they come along and say, it's not really that way, So it makes sense that they would be confused. All right.
You next, Roger.
And now I'm trying to get my computer going here. Okay.
Roger, so, Caligastia, when the Planetary Prince came about 500,000 years ago, right?
Right.
And when was the Caligastia's downfall?
About 250,000 years into his reign. So to us, it'd be about 250,000 years ago, 240, 250, something like that, right? And so for the first 250,000 years, they were peaceful, they taught the natives, they set up encampments, and people sent delegates to Galagasta to learn crafts and things like that, you know. So this was an educational center of the world, basically. And that went on for 250,000 years. And then when
they actually developed families and clans and tribes.
That's exactly right, Millie. And
creating a government.
yeah, so when something else just popped up? Oh, okay. So when the betrayal happened, there was nothing but no planetary government to speak of to the tribes for about 200,000 years till Adam and Eve showed up, right? And that was about 35, 39,000 years ago, right? So for quite a long time, we were in great turmoil. Okay.
There's a horrible noise happening.
That's one of our cats trying to cough up a hairball.
Sounds like he's coughing up a hairball.
Yeah, he is.
That's what he's doing.
Turn his speaker off.
Well, we can't.
I wish we could.
Yeah.
Sorry.
All right, so am I up next then? All right, about 500 years after Calagasta's downfall, a widespread revival of learning and religion of a primitive sort, but nonetheless real and beneficial, occurred. Orlandolph became a great teacher among the blue race, and this is 500 years after the betrayal, right? And led many of the tribes back to the worship of the true God under the name of the Supreme Chief. Okay? This was the greatest advance of the blue man until later times when this race was so greatly upset by the admixture of the Adamic stock. So, basically, Orlandolph got them going in the right direction again, right? About 500 years after Calagasta's betrayal, just the blue man, right? And I believe Orlandolph is one of the 24 also, if I'm not mistaken. But it's interesting that they mixed, so many of them mixed with the Adamic stock later on, okay? And that's what ends up being the European race, or the white race, right? Okay, let's keep going. Rodney, I think you're next.
Okay. The European researches and explorations of the Old Stone Age have largely to do with unearthing the tools, bones, and art craft of these ancient blue men, for they persisted in Europe until recent times. The so-called white races of Eurasia are the descendants of these blue men, as they were first modified by slight mixture with yellow and red, and as they were later greatly upstepped by the assimilating the greater portion of the violet race.
So they mixed with basically with the yellow and the red men, many of them, and then they were assimilated by a great portion of the violet race, the violet blood. What's the violet race? The violet race is the race of Adam and Eve, right? So what we consider the white races, or the lighter color races of skin, are the descendants of these blue men, the yellow men, the red men mixed with the violet race, Adam and Eve stock. Okay, and they got the greatest portion of it anyway. All right, Tim, I believe you're up.
6. The Indigo race. As the red men were the most advanced of the Sandic peoples, so the black men were the least progressive. They were the least to migrate from their highland homes. They journeyed to Africa, taken possession of the continent, and have ever since remained there, except when they have been forcibly taken away from age to age as slaves.
Okay, so the migration of the indigo race into other continents mostly happened because of the other races carrying them off by force, okay, and making them slaves.
Me.
Right.
Isolated in Africa, the indigo people, like the red man, received little or none of the race elevation which would have been derived from the infusion of the Adamic stock. Alone in Africa, the indigo race made little advancement until the days of Orvannon, got it, until the days of Orvannon, when they experienced a great spiritual awakening, while they later almost entirely forgot the God of gods proclaimed by Orvannon. They did not entirely lose their desire to worship the unknown. At least they maintained a form of worship up to a few thousand years ago.
Okay. So even the indigo, the black men, had strong spiritual values. All right. Diane?
Notwithstanding their backwardness, these indigo peoples have exactly the same standing for the celestial powers as any other earthly race.
And I feel like an explanation of this paragraph is in order. You know, they're talking about the black men back then, right? And they still had the same standing before the celestial powers, and they still do. Plus the fact, you think about the black men now, we're so intermarried, racially intermixed, there's not really a true indigo race left when it comes right down to it. It's just like the white race. We've all become Heinz 57. So what they're stating here is back then these people were a little more backwards, but they had the same standing as everybody else, right? But that's no longer the case. They're not backward at all. All right. Am I up next? All right. These were ages of intense struggles between the various races. But near the headquarters of the planetary prince, the more enlightened and more recently taught groups lived together in comparative harmony. Though no great cultural conquest of the world races had ever been achieved up to the time of the serious disruption of this regime by the outbreak of the Lucifer Rebellion. Okay. You can see why this rebellion made such an impact on every planet, including ours, that it was on, right? Because it negated the plan of God, at least it tried to, during that period of time. Okay.
I think it's mine.
Yeah, I think you are, Ronnie.
From time to time, all these different peoples experienced cultural and spiritual revivals. Manson was a great teacher of the post-planetary prince days, but mention is made only of those outstanding leaders and teachers who markedly influenced and inspired a whole race. With the passing of time, many lesser teachers arose in different regions, and in the aggregate, they contributed much to the sum total of those saving influences which prevented the total collapse of cultural civilization, especially during the long and dark ages between the Caligastia Rebellion and the arrival of Adam.
So it was these teachers that kept the concept of God the Father alive over through these long ages. And this kind of gives us a call to arms ourselves, because we have such a major change in culture that's going on in the world right now. It's important for us to teach these principles of the Urantia book for generations to come, because if we don't keep this message alive for generations to come, then it's going to go away just like it has in the past. You know, so every time you teach anything having to do with spiritual enlightenment, it benefits those people coming behind you, right? And in the mansion worlds, that's the way they test to see if you have learned your lessons of spiritual advancement. You have to teach those who come behind you. So it's very important for us to do
Hey, Roger.
Yeah.
What exactly would be spiritual enlightenment? Is it spiritual knowledge?
It's spiritual knowledge, and anything coming from this book has a certain amount of spiritual knowledge. Even the secular information that comes from it has spiritual tones within it. You know. And so that knowledge is important for all of us to have and for us to teach the children.
And how exactly do we make spiritual advancement? Is it by the maturity within the individual? Its comprehension?
Yes, that's exactly right, Tim. It's the maturity of the individual, but it's also how you relate to other people, how you can teach other people the lessons that you've learned of this life. Because you'll notice when you get away from spiritual teachings and away from refreshing your memory of these things each and every week, you have a tendency to revert back to the barbarianism of the ages of the past. That is the problem. So it's important for us to refresh our memories on this constantly, right?
So when they mention those two things, spiritual enlightenment and spiritual advancement, they're talking about on Urantia. It's not just on, is it on the man? Well, it's on the mansion worlds.
Well, it's on the mansion worlds for sure, but it's on. They're talking about on Urantia also,
okay.
right?
Tim,
Yes.
I should add to the spiritual enlightenment. It's not only that you learn, but it's when you know in your heart that it's the truth and you recognize it, that it is the truth, and then you're enlightened because you've got that knowledge.
That's right.
And it gets absorbed.
Yeah. And there's a big difference, Tim, between when we start reading the book and we question everything. When I started reading the book the first time, you know, I was 18 years old, 19 years old, and I questioned everything, you know. And it's hard to absorb great lessons when you're fighting it all the way through. But the more and more you read it, the more you come to accept the concepts and the teachings in it, then it becomes part of your life and becomes part of you. And that can only be had through experience. You know, it's just like you think about it, as a person gets older, we should grow mentally, physically, and spiritually, right? Because we're more enlightened in the advanced stages, hopefully. So
is it kind of like self-realization when you start to realize what that truth is, or what does that word really mean when the revelatories say self-realization? Is it to know?
It's to know truth and to understand truth, yeah.
Okay, thank you, Roger.
All right.
Roger, without looking back, how many years ago did Adam come here?
I think it was 38,000 or 39,000 years ago. Don't quote me on that.
All right.
It's between 35 and 39. I always mess up the date on that one, Roger, for some reason I can't remember it.
But hey, Roger, don't you think that the 6 Sagitt races of Urantia did learn from the Corporeal 100?
Oh,
and they
yeah.
took those lessons?
Oh, yeah.
But
you know,
a majority of them
especially
pretty
the
much
ones,
faltered?
Yeah, especially the ones that didn't falter, right? They learned the lessons from them, and some of them stayed loyal until they were removed from the planet. You know, they started their own civilization. You know, so and we're going to talk about that when we get to those papers. So let's keep moving on this tonight. I forget who's next now. We've talked so long.
Rodney just read.
Oh, okay. Well, you're up, Tim. Would you read?
There were ages of intense struggle between.
No, I think it was
Which one is it?
There are many good and sufficient reasons.
Oh yes, there are many good and sufficient reasons for the plan of evolving either 3 or 6 colored races on the worlds of space. Though Urantia mortals may not be in a position fully to appreciate all of these reasons, we would call attention to the following.
Okay, hang on. I want you to read the first one, but I want to have a comment about this, and that's this. This indicates that all planets in their evolution developed this amount of races, all right, 3 to 6 colored races on every single world, and these are the reasons why this is the case, okay? All right, go ahead and read the first one, Tim.
Number 1. Variety is indispensable to opportunity for the wide function of natural selection, differential survival of superior strains.
It's basically a good policy to mix different strains together to become a better stock of people. It helps us improve.
So, hey Roger, would you say that the 6 Sagitt races were that good strain?
Yes, that's what I'm saying. And because we had 6 different types, we basically ended up with better people as we mixed, okay, and as we do mix. And when we eventually come together back to one race, it will be because of these different colored races that we'll have a very strong stock of people at that point, right? Okay. Millie, would you take the next one?
Yes, we do have to quit killing off the best.
That's right, we do.
Stronger and better races are to be had from the interbreeding of diverse peoples when these different races are carriers of superior inheritance factors. And the Uracha races would have benefited by such an early amalgamation, provided such a conjoined people could have been subsequently effectively upstepped by a thoroughgoing admixture with the superior Adamic stock. The attempt to execute such an experiment on Uracha under present racial conditions would be highly disastrous.
So we had that one chance to be upstepped.
Amen.
Yeah. We had that one chance to be upstepped by the Adamic stock, and it failed because of the failure of Adam and Eve. But we did get some of it, and so we have to make do with what we have now, right? Continue on. Okay. Diane?
3. Competition is healthfully stimulated by diversification of races.
It's as simple as it can be. All right, 4. Differences in status of the races and the groups within each race are essential to the development of human tolerance and altruism. Now think about this. When we're talking about the different races, why do you think they have the different areas on the mansion world where they awaken different races?
To sort out the problems?
To sort out the problems. That's right. Because if you come from a specific race, you will have a tendency of specific tendencies, good and bad, right? So they want to get you mixed in together and start correcting some of that.
So those problems could be racism?
Yep, they could be racism.
Or hatred or toward
Yeah.
other races?
Yeah. It's a built-in hatred for beings that are not exactly like yourself.
So if you're not racist, you pretty much progress faster though, right?
Yeah, you progress faster, and we will all progress past this racial hatred, but it's a learned concept. It's something we have to learn, right? Okay, who's next?
I think I
No, I think I am. Homogeneity of the human race is not desirable until the peoples of an evolving world attain comparably high levels of spiritual development. Y'all catch that? So we have to upgrade our spiritual development before we get intermixed too much, right?
What's homogeneity?
In other words, mixing together to a point where you're almost indistinguishable.
Like homogenized milk.
Like homogenized milk, that's right.
So they're pretty much forbidding the mixing of races?
No.
It's not a good, it's not a desirable thing.
It's not
until
a
we're more
desirable
spiritually
thing.
developed.
Yeah, until we're more highly spiritually developed so that we can accept each other more, right? All right. Number 7. Rodney, I think you're up.
I think I am. Excuse me. Number 7. Dispersion of the colored races. When the colored descendants of the same family began to multiply, and as they sought opportunity for expansion into adjacent territory, the 5th glacier, the 3rd of geologic count, was well advanced on its southern drift over Europe and Asia. These early colored races were extraordinarily tested by the rigors and hardships of the glacier age of their origin. This glacier was so extensive in Asia that for thousands of years migration to eastern Asia was cut off, and not until the later retreat of the Mediterranean Sea, consequent on elevation of Arabia, was it possible for them to reach Africa.
Okay, so it's because of the geology of the area made things limited. That's what they're telling us here, right? And it was the third glacier, which is the fifth glacier, or the fifth glacier, which is the third glacier of record that we know of, right? And this is, let me get it on my screen here. Oops, I'm sorry.
Are they saying that you couldn't even get to Africa, that no human was in Africa, or
Well, there were human beings down there, but it was the mixture of the previous peoples, like the Neanderthals, right?
yeah, okay.
Yeah, they were down there, right? And this is a chart from Don Estes' chart too. This is from Don Estes, and it talks about the mixed races, the Adamites, the violet race, and we're going to talk about that when we get to Adam and Eve. The Nodites, the descendants of the Dalmatians. Now these were the Caligasser 100 that migrated to what was called the land of Nod. And the reason it was called the land of Nod, it was because Nod was one of the Caligasser 100, right? Okay, and that's what they're talking. That's what they're talking about here in the Nodites. The secondary Sangik, the orange, green, and indigo, was the next of the 5 skeletal types. The primary Sangik was the red, blue, and yellow. And from this we know each one of these had different skeletons, different skeletal types to them, okay, which we can dig up, basically. And then there were the Endonic, which is the Urantia Aboriginals, which was the first people, right? So as scientists dig fossils up down through time, they will find these 5 different types of skeletons, okay, one way or another, all right? Now, we have 3 modern-day skeletal types. Why do we have 3 modern-day skeletal types? Because the 3 modern-day skeletal types are the mixtures of these 5 up above. Okay, so the 3 modern day is the Caucasoid, which is the mixture of the Andite, the Adamite, and the Nodites. Okay, then we have the Mongoloid, which is the primary Sangik type of the red, yellow, blue, red, yellow, and blue. Red, blue, and yellow. I'm sorry. And then we have the Negroid, which is the the secondary Sangik types, which would be what? That would be orange, green, and indigo. Okay, so each one of these have different skeletal types in modern day today. All right, so if we look at skeletons, I can tell you that from being a doctor, a chiropractor for so many years, depending on your race, you have slight variations in your skeletons. Okay, and you can determine someone's race from their skeleton. Okay, this is the mixture table. Again, I'm not going to belay that a whole lot, but refer back to this and you can see the remixturing of these races, if you want to. Okay? And who's next? I think Tim is.
I just read.
Yeah.
Tim.
Thus, it was that for almost 100,000 years, these Sangik people spread out around the foothills and migrated together, more or less, notwithstanding the peculiar but natural, and how do you pronounce that? Antipathy, which early manifested itself between the different races.
Okay, so people naturally did not, they wanted to segregate themselves from the other types of races, and then they did just that for many years. Okay, Millie.
Yes. Between the times of the planetary prince and Adam, India became the home of the most cosmopolitan population ever to be found on the face of the earth. But it was unfortunate that this mixture came to contain so much of the green, orange, and indigo races. These secondary Sangic peoples found existence more easy and agreeable in the Southlands, and many of them subsequently migrated to Africa. The primary Sangic peoples, the superior races, avoided the tropics, the red man going northeast to Asia, closely followed by the yellow man, while the blue man moved northwest into Europe.
That's how everybody ended up in those areas.
Hey, Roger,
Fruit basket turnover.
Fruit basket turnover, that's right.
when they say orange race, are they talking about Egyptian, or can you give me some sort of ideal?
Yeah, the example of the orange race would have been the remnants of the Egyptian people. Yeah.
That's what I thought, because I
Yeah.
understand red, yellow, and indigo,
Yeah.
and orange, and then green is no longer available. But it's
Yeah.
funny because at one time I remember seeing a green man of National Geographic. I overheard a lecture or something like that. They were talking about it, and he was literally green.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And
My
they all
mother-in-law had a neighbor, and she'd say, "Y'all, she's green. Can't you see Dorothy's green?
Yeah.
She's green, y'all, I'm telling you." That's
Well,
what
they
she
pretty-
would say over and over.
they pretty much have been absorbed by the indigo race, the black man. You know, all of them. So
It's rose and olive, she's
those that
green.
weren't wiped out. Yeah. Right. Okay. Let's keep going here. I think.
But our goal or of the inevitability of the mixing of the races, we would become olive.
Olive color, kind of
Color.
an olive color.
Yeah.
color.
So it certainly is a shade of green.
Yeah, it is.
When you say olive, it's black, not green. There's two olive.
Yeah, you know, because of the
Yeah,
absorbance
she's
of the
saying green, yeah.
the absorbance of the black man of the green man. You know, many black men are of more of an olive complexion too. They're also, you know, all the Egyptians, you know, they mix with the orange and the black, and that's how you get a lot of the Egyptian stock. So it's kind of interesting, really.
No, what I was talking about was the races of the future. One religion, one race. And you
One-
said that we would be an olive skin.
Yeah, we'll be kind of an olive skin race because of the.
So I was asking, is that more of a black or more of a green type of view?
It's more of it's probably right between, because you'll have the remnants of the white, the remnants of the yellow, and you mix those in with the black man, you're going to end up with a lighter shade of brown or an olive type skin, you know.
Okay, thank you, Roger.
Yeah.
The red men early began to migrate to the northeast on the heels of the retreating ice, passing around the highlands of India and occupying all of northeastern Asia. They were closely followed by the yellow tribes, who subsequently drove them out of Asia into North America.
All right. That's how the Indians got into North America. When the relatively pure line remnants of the red race forsook Asia, there were 11 tribes, and they numbered a little over 1,000 men, women, and children.
7,000.
Oh, I'm sorry, 7,000 men, women, and children. These tribes were accompanied by 3 small groups of mixed ancestry. The largest of these being a combination of the orange and blue race. So even the Indians had a mixture of the orange and blue race when they ended up in North America.
That's true, and all over, when you see a map of all the Indians throughout the United States and Canada,
Uh-huh.
they all look different. They have
Yeah.
French,
Yeah.
I mean, they're
Yeah.
all different looking people.
These 3 groups never fully fraternized with the red men and early journeyed southward to Mexico and Central America, where they were later joined by a small group of mixed yellows and reds. These peoples all intermarried and founded a new and amalgamated race, one which was much less warlike than the pure line red men. Within 5,000 years, this amalgamated race broke up into 3 groups, establishing the civilizations respectively of Mexico, Central America, and South America offshoot did receive a faint touch of the blood of Adam. Okay, so the Incas, they were part of this group. Okay, so you see all the history of the Incan people. They were the offshoot of the Indians and the yellow and blue men, right?
Hey Roger, when they talk about the South America
Yeah.
receiving a touch of blood of Adam,
Yeah.
is that Mexicans, Asians? What exactly is that?
They-
Just above?
Americans,
Yeah, they would be.
Incas, Chileans.
Yeah, the Incas, all the islands down along, the Philippines,
The Hawaii.
the Hawaii,
Polynesian.
Okay, thank you.
Polynesians. Yeah, that's who that would be.
And how did they receive a faint touch of the blood?
Probably through travel. If you think about it, Rodney, there were probably some of the people that got some infusion of the Adamic blood that started to migrate out of Europe and places like that, and by sailing in boats and that sort of thing.
Maybe I'm not reading this right. Perhaps it's saying that all of them did receive the blood, except the offshoot that went to South America.
Yeah,
It did receive a faint touch of it.
that you're right.
I think, I was reading backwards.
Yeah, that's right.
So hey Roger, could you say today that the white man has a little bit of violent blood in him?
Yeah, our descendant. Yeah, we're descendants of the violent
Well,
stock.
all descending races, basically.
All of them.
Okay, great,
All
yeah.
of them, yeah. Yeah, pretty much
So that's-
all the races have a hint of the violent blood, but it came through intermarriage and mixing and that sort of thing over thousands of years now, right?
But it's fair to say that the green man is the only one extinct, correct?
No, the green man and the orange man are both extinct. They were wiped out.
That's what I thought. Yeah.
Yeah,
So it's just the yellow, red, indigo, and blue.
right. Well,
Okay.
the blue is actually extinct too, but because it was amalgamated into the mixture of the red, yellow, and violet, right?
Mine's 57.
Indigo.
Indigo and violet. But yeah, they turned into what we know as the white man, the remnants of the blue man. Okay, so we are the descendants of the blue men. Anyway, look at it.
Okay, thank you.
So
Roger.
when you go to Las Vegas and see the Blue Man Group,
Yes, I did. They
You
were
might-
wonderful.
you might be seeing your great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather, right?
They
What he
have
looked like.
Such a talent.
Such talent. That's right. That was a joke, by the way. Okay. I'm totally lost.
You just read, Roger,
Oh, did I?
when the relativity. Yeah, you just read that.
Okay.
Hey, it's my turn.
We're on
Rodney.
number 6.
To a certain extent.
That's correct, Rodney.
You still there, Rodney?
Yeah, I am.
Oh, sorry. I need to
I was waiting for you to change the screen.
Oh.
To a certain extent, the early red and yellow men mingled in Asia. And offspring of this union journeyed on to the east and along the southern seacoast, and eventually were driven by the rapidly increasing yellow race onto the peninsulas and nearby islands of the sea. They are the present day brown men.
And these are the men of the islands, right? The whole chain of islands that goes along Asia.
Oh, you mean Hawaiians and
Yeah, Polynesians, Hawaiians,
Polynesians,
all of those. Yeah, they all came from this race. All right. Tim, I think you're next.
The yellow race has continued to occupy the central regions of Eastern Asia. Of all the 6 colored races, they have survived in great numbers, while the yellow men now and then emerged in racial war, engaged in racial war. They did not carry on such incessant and
Yeah.
resentless wars of extermination as were waged by the red, green, and orange men. These 3 races virtually destroyed themselves before they were finally all but annihilated by their enemies of other races.
Millie.
Okay, no comments on that one.
No, I think it's pretty self-explanatory. We can see how.
Since the 5th glacier did not extend so far south in Europe, the way was partially open for the Sangit peoples to migrate to the northwest. And upon the retreat of the ice, the blue men, together with a few other small racial groups, migrated westward along the old trails of the Andan tribes. They invaded Europe in successive waves, occupying most of the continent.
You see how the ice had something to do with this disbursement of the races? As the race retreated, as the ice retreated, the blue men followed the ice back up into Europe, basically. You know, and that's how we ended up populating Spain, France, England, you know, all the European continent, really.
In Europe, they soon encountered the Neanderthal descendants of their early and common ancestor, Andon. These older European Neanderthalers had been driven south and east by the glacier and thus were in position quickly to encounter and absorb their invading cousins of the Sangit tribes.
So some of the Neanderthals absorbed some of the Sangit people, right?
Hey Roger, did the Sangit races and the Neanderthal look kind of different
Yes.
from one another?
Yes, they
That's
did.
what I thought. Okay, thank you.
Yes, they did. A lot different, really. You know, the Neanderthal races were a lot more animalistic looking than the Sangit tribes were, right? The Sangit tribes, they call, in one instance, were beautiful. You know, they were very nice looking humans, you know, much like we are today. In general, and to start with, the Sangit tribes were more intelligent than, and in most ways far superior to, the deteriorated descendants of the early Andonic plainsmen. And the mingling of the Sangit tribes with the Neanderthal peoples led to an immediate improvement of the older race. It was this infusion of Sangit blood, more especially that of the blue men, which produced the marked improvement in the Neanderthal peoples exhibited by the successive waves of increasingly intelligent tribes that swept over Europe from the east. Okay?
Hey Roger, I had a question.
Yeah.
Do you know what year it is this is all taking place on Section 7? Is
Yeah.
it about, you
Yeah,
have an idea, BC or something like that, BCE? Or
Yeah, it would be about 200, it would be around 200 from 150 to 250 BC, 1000 BC.
So our planetary prince came here.
250,000 BC. No,
No,
that's not right.
500,000.
500,000 BC is when the planetary prince came. The rebellion started at around 250,000 years BC.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Okay, we already read that.
So I thought the Neanderthal became extinct.
They did.
I do.
Well, some of them were absorbed, but that's led to their extinction, see. The pure line of Neanderthalers basically ceased to exist a couple 100,000 years ago. Okay? Right near the end of the Ice Age, actually. All right? Let's see.
Oh, it's
You're
my
right.
turn.
Dear, I think you're right.
Oh, nice. During the following interglacial period, this new Neanderthal race extended from England to India. The remnant of the blue race left in the old Persian peninsula later amalgamated with certain others, primarily the yellow, and the resultant blend, subsequently somewhat upstepped by the violet race of Adam, has persisted as the swarthy nomadic tribes of modern Arabs.
So all the Arab states over there, that's where their history comes from, right? The remnants of the blue race amalgamated with the yellow, all right, and later was upstepped by the violet, and that's where the Arabs come from. All efforts to identify the Sangit ancestry of modern peoples must take into account the later improvement of the racial strains by the subsequent admixture of Adamic blood. So the Adamic blood improved everyone that it encountered, right? Rodney, I think you're right.
Excuse me. These superior races sought the northern or temperate climes, while the orange, green, and indigo races successfully
Successively.
successively gravitated to Africa over the newly elevated land bridge, which separated the westward retreating Mediterranean from the Indian Ocean.
Hey Roger, it does say the superior races. Are they talking about the blue, yellow? Because I know they mentioned orange and green and indigo.
Yeah.
So it's blue, yellow, and that's it, right?
Blue, yellow, and red
Okay, thank you.
were considered the more superior races. The green, orange, and indigo were considered secondary races. I wouldn't use the word inferior, but they do use that occasionally. But they
But
were.
this was
Yeah, this was early on, right?
okay. Yeah, this was like 250,000 BC years
That's
ago.
right.
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 Okay, thank you.
You take the next one, Kim? for me?
Sure. The last of the Semitic people to migrate from the
Oh, no, we already did that. Did we? Or did I just, I went,
Oh, we've not, okay.
is that the right one?
Yeah.
Yeah, the last.
Okay, I hit the
Screen it
wrong
right.
thing. Okay,
Okay, no.
sorry.
Okay, the last of the Semitic peoples to migrate from their center of race origin was the Indigo Man. About the time the Green Man was killing off the Orange race in Egypt, and greatly weakening himself in so doing, the Great Black Exodus started south through Palestine along the coast. And later, when these physically strong Indigo peoples overran Egypt, they wiped the Green Man out of existence by sheer force of numbers. These Indigo races absorbed the remnants of the Orange Man and much of the stock of the Green Man, and certain of the Indigo tribes were considerably improved by this racial amalgamation.
So because they absorbed some of the green and the orange, it actually improved the stock of the indigo races.
So basically what they're saying too is that at one time, the Indigo Man ruled Egypt, which is actually true.
Yeah.
In National Geographic, there was on the cover
Yeah.
about that.
Yeah.
And then there's a lot of what they call a lot of black Hebrews that are
Yeah.
very proud if you go on YouTube, and they're just, they're really racist, but, the remarks that they make, but the pride that they have about
Yeah.
the black man and blah, 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 but
Right.
I'm not going to get into that, but that says a lot.
Yeah, it does. All right, let's keep going. Millie, would you take this one?
Yes. And so it appears that Egypt was first dominated by the Orange Man, then by the Green, followed by the Indigo Black Man, and still later by a mongrel race of Indigo, Blue, and modified Green Men. But long before Adam arrived, the Blue Men of Europe and the mixed races of Arabia had driven the Indigo race out of Egypt and far south on the African continent.
And that's our history, right? All right.
As the Sangit migrations draw to a close, the green and orange races are gone. The red man holds North America, the yellow man Eastern Asia, the blue man Europe, and the indigo race has gravitated to Africa. India harbors a blend of the secondary Sangit races, and the brown man, a blend of the red and yellow, holds the islands off the Asiatic coast. An amalgamated race of rather superior potential occupies the highlands of South America. The pure Andonites live in the extreme northern region of Europe and in Iceland, Greenland, and northeastern North America. In Canada, the northeastern,
Yeah.
would be Canada and
Yeah.
It sounds like the Andonites were like Vikings.
yeah.
Yeah, that might be a correct assumption.
Mhm.
During the periods of farthest glacial advance, the westernmost of the Andean tribes came very near being driven into the sea. They lived for years on a narrow southern strip of the present island of England, and it was the tradition of these repeating glacial advances that drove them to take to the sea. When the sixth and last glacier finally appeared, They were the first marine adventurers. That's why they may have been the Vikings.
Yeah, they were Vikings.
Yeah.
Okay, they built boats and started in search of new lands which they hoped might be free from the terrifying ice invasions. And some of them reached Iceland, others Greenland, but the vast majority perished from hunger and thirst on the open sea.
Mm.
Hey Roger, they mentioned the word Andin tribes. Is that a reference to the Andinites?
That's right. That's
Okay,
right.
thank you.
All right. Rodney, I think you're next.
A little more than 80,000 years ago, shortly after the red man entered northwestern North America, the freezing over of the North Seas and the advance of the local ice fields on Greenland drove these Eskimo descendants of Eurasia Aborigines to seek a better land, a new home, and they were successful, safely crossing the narrow straits, which then separated Greenland from the northeastern landmasses of North America. They reached the continent about 2,100 years after the red man arrived in Alaska. Subsequently, some of the mixed stock of the blue man journeyed westward and amalgamated with the later date Eskimos, and this union was slightly beneficial to the Eskimo tribes.
So the blue man came from one direction, the red man came from another, right? And they ended up mixing. Right. Tim, I think you're next.
About 5,000 years ago, a chance meeting occurred between an Indian tribe and a long Eskimo group. On the southeastern shores of Hudson Bay, these two tribes found it difficult to communicate with each other, but very soon they intermarried, with the result that these Eskimos were eventually absorbed by the more numerous redmen. And this represents the only contact of the North American red man with any other human stock down to about 1,000 years ago, when the white man first chanced to land on the Atlantic coast.
It's interesting that they tell us that 1,000 years ago is when the white man actually landed on the Atlantic coast.
Yeah, that would be nice.
That would be way before Columbus, right?
That's what I was going to say.
Yeah. All right. Who gets the, I think it's Millie gets the privilege of the last paragraph.
The struggles of these early ages were characterized by courage, bravery, and even heroism. And we all regret that so many of those sterling and rugged traits of your early ancestors have been lost to the latter-day races. While we appreciate the value of many of the refinements of advancing civilization, we miss the magnificent persistence and superb devotion of your early ancestors, which oftentimes bordered on grandeur and sublimity. Printed by a life carrier resident on Uracha.
Presented. Not printed, but presented.
I thought I said presented.
I thought
Printed.
Yeah, that was pretty interesting. I thought it was pretty good painting.
That was amazing.
Yeah, next time we'll go on to 64 or 65.
Now I'll be evaluating the remnants of the races, the colors,
Yeah.
combinations.
Next time we'll talk about the over control of evolution.
They didn't mention the pink man,
Yeah.
the pink man,
Let's
really-
close with a prayer
the
tonight.
white man. Oh, I'm sorry.
Millie, would you like to close for us tonight? You out there, Millie?
Yes, what?
Would you like to close us with a prayer?
Oh, yes, I can do that. I wasn't paying attention. Oh, it's been a wonderful evening. Heavenly Father, we have to give you thanks tonight for the beauty of our world and the variety of the people in it. Please guide us as we try to understand just how all this came about. It is wonderfully confusing and thought-provoking. We thank you for this book and for Roger, who acts as our guide as we try to study it. Please be with us in the coming days and weeks ahead. We pray in his name, Jesus Christ Michael. Amen.
Amen. And thank you for joining us at home. Please come see us again. We're getting lots and lots of new people watching our videos on Facebook and Vimeo and different places. So
I think Millie got it right when she said thought-provoking.
that's right.
Very thought-provoking.
It's always thought-provoking, if nothing else. Well, thank you for coming to see us tonight.
I thought wonderfully confusing.